In just a few weeks, we're going to be officially halfway through the 2026 FIFA World Cup qualifiers in the African zone. So, this is a very important international break, and we're going to be talking about that and much more coming up next on the African Five-A-Side podcast. Welcome back to an episode of the African Football Report on the African Five-A-Side podcast. I'm your host, Maher Mezahi, and as always, this podcast is brought to you by africasaCountry.com. There's a really good article up at the moment about FIFA's double standards, written by a good friend of mine, Bassel Maqdadi, who is a Palestinian journalist, and he's talking mostly about the difference in excluding the Russian national team from international competition and the Israeli one, despite flagrant abuses of international law. So that's going to be in the description below. If you're interested in reading it, I highly recommend you do. You can click on that there. So yeah, guys, I was away for some time. I apologize about that. Calendar was a bit empty, even though there were a lot of important matches on the continent. Orlando Pirates came back and beat Sundowns 2-1, and now if they win the games in hand, the race to the PSL is back on. Al Ahly versus Zamalek, there was a lot of big drama, as Al Ahly refused to play in the Cairo derby, and they're now, in the sort of home stretch of the Egyptian Premier League. RS Berkane won the Moroccan Botola with 5 matches left to play. That's the earliest any Moroccan side in history has ever won the Moroccan League. So yeah, lots of stuff that we sort of missed down on breaking, that we missed breaking down. But I'm back now, fully recharged, batteries are charged, and I see like 2, 3 months of nonstop football ahead of me. These international qualifiers coming up. After that, we're back with the CAF Champions League and the CAF Confederation Cup. I'm going to be traveling out to matches, whether they be in Algeria, Tunisia, maybe even beyond, all the way through to the Club World Cup, where I am going to be in America between New York and Philadelphia, covering at least 3 African clubs: Al Ahly, Wydad Casablanca, and Esperance de Tunis. I'm going to try to get to a Sundowns match, but because they don't really play between New York and Philadelphia and they play in 3 different cities, it's going to be a little bit tough. But I'll definitely be covering all of the clubs while I'm out there. So yeah, but for now, let's focus on these FIFA World Cup qualifiers. Um, it's a weird one, this March window, because it's really been 6 months since national teams have been away from one another, since players have been away from one another. And at this point in the season, I noticed that there's been a lot of injuries. If you look at really any of the national teams and you go through the players that were called up compared to the players that actually show up, you'll usually find anywhere between 2 and 5 injuries for each national team. And I think it's just the accumulation of matches, playing through the winter break at times for the Premier League clubs. And yeah, these are difficult trips, for a lot of African teams, a lot of travel. And so usually if a player has a niggling injury and they don't want to risk it, they can tend to take this window off. But the stars have all been called up. They're all playing: Sadio Mane, Riyad Mahrez, Mohamed Salah, and like I said, this is an absolutely crucial break for the FIFA World Cup qualifiers, because after the conclusion of the next 2 weeks, we're going to have played, 60% of them. And teams are either going to be in a position where they're on the road clear to qualification, or in a place where they only have, 12 points to make up over the coming calendar year. So it's going to be very, very difficult. So let's go group by group and just make some brief comments and observations, and yeah, and then we'll be updating as the matches are being played almost on a day-to-day basis. So in Group A, we have Egypt, who are quite clearly in the lead here with 10 points. And then you have Guinea-Bissau with 6 points, Burkina Faso with 5, Sierra Leone with 5, Ethiopia with 3, and Djibouti with 1. I think Egypt are going to create some real separation here. They're going to be playing a match against Sierra Leone at home and Ethiopia away in Morocco. They're going to start with that Ethiopia match and then play Sierra Leone. So these are 2 teams that aren't really up to Egypt's standards, especially how Egypt has been playing since Hussam Hassan has been coach. And so I could see Egypt picking up 6 points here. And if they do, they'll be at 16 points. I really think they're going to seal their qualification already, more than a year away from the FIFA Club World Cup. When I look at the list that Hussam Hassan has called up the players, I think it's a little bit of a weird one. He left Imam Ashur, who's probably the best player in the Egyptian Premier League, at home. Probably Al Ahly's best player this season as well. He also left Karim Debes, who's been playing really good as a sort of left back. He's very versatile, but sort of plays that left back position. I don't know why he didn't call up Mohamed Hamdi as well from Pyramids, that left back. Maybe he's injured at the moment, but it's a weird one where I think he has one right back in the list and zero left backs, which makes me immediately assume that Hussam Hassan is going to be playing with a back three over here, which he has done, I believe, last summer. And I think it worked to okay effect. It gave Mohamed Salah a little more freedom. So I think that's where we're headed. He's probably going to be playing a 3-4-3, 3-5-2, probably going to be asymmetrical. And it's really going to be focused on giving himself freedom and license to try and put his best players in the attacking line on the pitch. Because when I look at Egypt's attacking line of players, for a long period of time, I thought Senegal had the best forwards, and then I thought, oh, maybe Morocco if we don't talk about number nines, Cote d'Ivoire, but now Nigeria, of course, we have to throw them in there. But when I look at it now, I think Egypt could possibly have the best attacking line in African football. Of course, Mohamed Salah, who's probably the best player in the world at the moment. Omar Marmoush, who's finding his feet with Manchester City, the 60 million pound signing coming from Eintracht Frankfurt. You have Mustafa Mohamed, who's been scoring goals in the French league. Um, so many players. Those are really just the top three, but you have so many players across that front line, many of whom I'm blanking on. But when I remember just reading the six names there and thinking, oh my God, there's just so much quality there. I don't even know who you're probably going to play those three, but Trezeguet always scores important goals for the Egyptian national team as well. Zizou is a sort of midfielder, but can also play on the wing. Um, yeah, I think that's one of the main challenges that Hussam Hassan is going to have to sort of navigate is which attacking players does he play in which position? And if he can find that key, that recipe, prior to the AFCON, then he'll have done a good job, in my opinion. But yeah, I really expect Egypt to pick up 6 points here and to do it fairly easily. Um, the other team I want to talk about in the group is Burkina Faso. They sort of have to catch up. They only have 5 points. They're in third place at the moment, and they have to try and catch a sort of playoff spot, the second place spot in the group. They, I think, picked up a really good player in midfield, handing a debut to Mohamed Zougrana, who plays in Algiers, actually for Mouloudia Club of Algiers. I think you're going to see him play in the Champions League, in my opinion, one of the best all-around midfielders playing on the continent at the moment. And he's going to be slot in very nicely alongside Blati Toure from Pyramids and Cedric Badolo, for example, who has a lot of AFCON experience as well. So it just adds to that scrappiness of the Burkinabe midfield. But when I look at their defenders, Burkina Faso have a great defending line. Issoufou Dayo, RS Berkane's iconic defender and captain. You have Edmund Tapsoba, one of the best players on the African continent with Bayer Leverkusen. Adamo Nagalo and Nasser Jiga, two very young, talented center halves. Issa Kabore, of course, the City Group prospect who's so fast. And then Steve Yago with his experience as sort of makeshift left back. So their defending is fine. Their midfield is scrappy. Unlike Egypt, I do have questions about their front line because you have Lassina Traore, who is always touted as a great talent as a striker from his time at Ajax and then Shakhtar Donetsk, but he's never really found the goal scoring efficiency and the ratio that he had earlier on in his career. Yeah, I know he got hit with several, I think, pretty severe injuries, knee ligament injuries, and that's always going to take, 5-10% from your overall explosiveness, and that really can affect a striker, maybe more than any other position. But I think for Burkina Faso to really live up to their billing, he's going to have to return to the striker that scores, a goal every th 3 matches out of four, that 75% to a goal a game ratio. If he can do that, that's going to add so much to their game because Dango Atara at Bournemouth has been great this year under Iraola, the Spanish coach. And Bertrand Traore has been getting a lot of game time for Ajax as well. So that front three is cool, but they need that striker that's going to be very sharp in front of goal. Group B. Group B is an interesting one because Sudan leads the group. Of course, Sudan knocked out Ghana to qualify to the AFCON. And right now they're leading the group at the FIFA World Cup Qualifiers. Now, if Sudan qualifies for the FIFA World Cup, don't get it twisted. This will be probably the biggest upset in the history of the FIFA World Cup. The biggest underdog story, we can say, because Sudan, of course, we all know that they're going through a horrific civil war back at home. They haven't been playing matches at home. And we talked about this extensively on the podcast, but it almost adds to their advantage because now they're playing in Saudi Arabia. They get a lot more time to sort of train together and build team chemistry. So that's something that I think we have to definitely keep an eye on. But this is going to be a true test for Sudan. First of all, they had a little bit of issues with the coach, James Kwesi Appiah, who's like a father figure to many of these players. He's a player that, he's been through so much in African football. He's been through national crises before when he was a player at the 1982 AFCON with Ghana. They didn't have enough money to travel to Libya, and then, there was like coup d'etats in Ghana with JJ Rawlings and so on and so forth. So James Kwesi Appiah is he's seen things, so I think he's a good person to have as a coach. Um, but he showed up late to training camp because one of the reasons was he wasn't paid on time. There were a lot of delayed salaries. Um, so I think if you're Sudan, you cannot let these issues start to creep in. You're on the brink of doing something historic, hopefully. And for you have to make sure that all the extracurriculars are smoothed out, right? But they've been training in Saudi Arabia for weeks, so much earlier than everybody else has been training. Some teams, players are arriving on Sunday, Monday, and they're playing on Wednesday, right? Sudan has been they played a friendly match 6 days ago against Oman that finished 0-0 on March 13th. So they're not only are they getting together earlier, but they're also playing matches. So they have a good squad when I look at the starting 11, but it's not fantastic, right? And this is why it would be such a big underdog story because when I look at the Sudan squad, and I even compare it, for example, to Al Hilal, like the best club in Sudan. I think Al Hilal have a better squad than the Sudanese national team, without wanting to disrespect the Sudanese national team. But still, they're getting great results. But the biggest test here is that they're going to play against Senegal. And Senegal are 2 points behind Sudan. They have 8 points in the group, in Group B. And this is a different Senegal side. So remember they had Aliou Cisse for nearly 10 years. And then I think fans and the government felt like things were stagnating, and they bring in his assistant coach Pap Thiaw. And Pap Thiaw initially immediately impressed us, putting 4 goals his side past Malawi, a feat that Aliou Cisse only did 3 times in his 9 years prior. Um, but since then, they've only scored like I think 2 goals a game, which is still pretty good, but it's not the lofty standards that we thought after the first match. But he's settling in. He really didn't really get his contract until I think a few weeks ago. He was still coaching with his assistant coach contract, which I think was around 5,000 euros a month, which is almost disrespectful. But one thing that we can already tip our hat off to is that he managed to convince Hassan Diao to come play for Senegal, and this is huge news, massive news. This is quite clearly one of the biggest prospects in African football. Now, Hassan Diao is 19 years old, currently playing in Como in Italy. Played for Real Betis last season, and Spain were very interested in his services. I think if he continued to perform the way he has over the next year or two, he probably would have earned a call up for Spain, definitely. But Pap Thiaw flew to Spain, spoke to him, and he managed to convince him to come play for Senegal right now. Um, and I really like, I almost said the signing, but I really like the call up because SNDL for me is almost like the anti Ismail Assar. Ismail Assar, if you remember, was the youngest player, I think, at the 2017 AFCON, and we had always expected him to sort of grow into the new Sadio Mane, and he has the pace, and he has the strength, and he has the technical ability, but he's just so inconsistent. He makes so many bad decisions at times, and he struggled with injury at times as well. Ascendiao is almost the opposite. So he has the strength. He's not as explosive or as fast, maybe, as Ismail Assar, but one thing that he has is when he gets in front of goal, he shoots the ball and he almost always hits the target. And it's a quality that I've noticed, that like Erling Haaland has, and especially Harry Kane. It's like one of the things that makes them really good strikers when they're in front of goal. They at least make the goalkeeper make the save, right? They always get a clean strike on the ball. At times they're unsavable, and at other times they at least get it on target. They can do it from all different kinds of angles, and that's what Asan Diao can do. Even though he doesn't necessarily play as a striker, he plays off of the wing a lot. But I think with his strength, with his sort of finishing ability, I think Asan Diao is probably maybe a future striker, and that could be good for Senegal as well. I think in the Italian league, he's one of the most efficient goal scorers in that I think he scores off of one of every 3 shots. So just to give you an example of how accurate he is with his shooting. So definitely a big pickup for Senegal, but they also have Sadio Mane, and they do have some injuries. Iliman Ndiaye is not there. Habib Diarra, the standout star midfielder, young midfielder, who's supposed to be the future of the Senegalese midfield alongside Pape Matar Sarr and Lamine Camara. Habib Diarra is injured as well, but still, Senegal have so much quality that I expect them to beat Togo and Sudan and to pick up 6 points and to place themselves firmly in the top of this group. Let's move on to Group C. South Africa. They have a derby. They're playing against Lesotho at home, and then they're playing against Benin and Cote d'Ivoire. I was listening to the Hugo Bruce press conference. He was talking about the fact that he doesn't have a left center back with the Dortley injury. Um, but still, I think South Africa here are looking to confirm their AFCON qualifiers for him. When I look at the midfield, I thought it was nice to see Talent, Patrick Masongani, and Rale Mofokeng rewarded for the way they've played for Orlando Pirates. Um, Still, when I look at, first of all, I love the squad. I think South Africa, again, I've been banging the drum on South Africa for the last, since the AFCON, and I think they've only gotten better since the AFCON. Um, but I think when I look at the front line, for example, Reyners has to be my striker. Um, I think I would still start Elias Mokwana on the right, even though Percy Tau has come back into the squad. Percy Tau, of course, playing in Qatar now, not at Al Ahly anymore. And I can understand celebrating his return to the squad because he's such an iconic player. He's probably a player that everybody looks up to and respects and wants to be a friend to. But I just don't, I'm not sure if he has the legs anymore. Mokwana does. He's really the opposite in that sense. He offers something that so other wingers or forwards offers, and that's constant running with pace, and his natural finishing instincts are so good. So Elias Mokwana on the right, I think I would put Rainers up top, and then it doesn't matter who you put on the left for me. It can be Mofokeng, um, or it could be Apollos, Osman Apollos, who's been really, really good as well for Bafana. Very excited to see Jaden Adams, I think, earn his third international appearance with Bafana. I think he's a player that I want to start seeing regularly in a rotation and playing matches regularly for Bafana. There's one final point I want to make about South Africa, though. We all know that they have, I don't want to say an over reliance on Mamelodi Sundowns player, but there's a strong Sundowns influence in the squad. And I was listening to one of my colleagues and friends, Njablu Ngidi, speak about Bafana and more about Sundowns actually, and about Ronald Williams, and the fact that they play so many matches, and this summer they're going to play in the Club World Cup, and they played in the AFCON in, last winter, and they're going to be playing in the AFCON this winter. And it really, a light bulb went off in my head. It's like, wow, that's true. Like, are we going to be monitoring that because there's so many players, the Sundowns players in the Bafana squad? Will they be overly used and as a result maybe be fatigued for the AFCON in Morocco? I think that's something that Hugo Bruce is going to have to struggle with because Ranon Williams, Aubrey Madiba, um, Mudau, and then if you want to throw in Kakana, if you want to throw in Tabo Mokoena, Jaden Adams, Rainers, there's a lot. Morena's played a lot. I mean, there's a lot of Sundowns influence in the South Africa side, so I think they're gonna have to monitor that and make sure that they keep players fresh because the price you can pay with especially soft tissue injuries can be huge heading into the Moroccan AFCON. Besides South Africa, we also should talk about Nigeria. They play Rwanda away and Zimbabwe at home. Two difficult matches. We saw how Rwanda gave South Africa trouble. They have a new coach as well, and usually when you have a new coach, all the players want to impress and call it a little bit of a like the new coach sort of bump. And he's the Algerian coach Adel Amrouche, and he was really known, for his time, whether it's at Kenya or Libya or most recently with Tanzania, as a coach that likes to batten down the hatches and make it very difficult for you to break him down. Maybe not so interested in scoring goals, maybe more realistic about his team's ability, and much more interested in not conceding. And he was that way with Botswana as well. And so Nigeria, with their attacking firepower, with Osimhen, with Lookman, with I don't need to tell you guys again, Boniface, Moses Simon, and so on and so forth. This is going to be an important match. I really want to see a lot of leadership, technical leadership, not rah 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 William Tristakong, like vocal leadership. I want to see technical leadership on the pitch when it's time for you to take the game by the scruff of the neck. I want to see Nigeria's best players do that, and particularly those two, Osimhen and Lookman. But even Zimbabwe is not an easy, out. We saw that they were doing pretty well at the AFCON qualifiers, but I think Nigeria, this is why they brought in the coach Eric Shell. His one main objective was get us back into the running for the FIFA World Cup qualifiers because in the group they're very very behind. They're fifth out of six teams, only 3 points. Now, luckily for them, nobody's really run away with the group, and it's a very competitive group. And I think the other teams are still going to take points off of one another, so things are not too late. But I think you need at least 4 out of 6 points here. If you don't get 4 out of 6 points here, you're putting an incredible amount of pressure on yourself for the rest of the year. Group D. Group D has Cameroon with 8 points leading the group, Libya with seven, Cape Verde with seven, Angola with six. So this is also a very competitive group. The thing with Cameroon is that I think they have a chance to really pull away here because they play Eswatini, who have 0 points and they're last in the group. Uh, Eswatini's they don't concede that many goals actually. They only conceded 6 goals in 4 matches. I've seen a lot worse records than that. Um, but still, they play Eswatini at home and then Libya away. And I think this is a good chance to pull away because Angola and Cape Verde, probably the two other best teams in this group, play one another, so they're going to neutralize one another. But I mean, we've been like very cautious and we've been critical of Cameroon with the federation situation, with the Ministry of Sport situation for the last year, really. But they just keep getting results. And I keep saying, this is one of the best starting 11s, one of the best starting 11s. But still, something tells me that dysfunction might catch up to them one of these days. Samuel Eto'o, by the way, was cleared from some of his charges and he was allowed to run for the CAF Executive Committee. He won a seat at the CAF Executive Committee. Um, and just to show you how dysfunctional this relationship is between him and his coach, at the press conference, I think a journalist asked the coach, Mark Brees, did you congratulate Samuel Eto'o on him being elected? And the coach said, like, why would I congratulate him? you know, did he congratulate me when I was named coach of the national team? So it's so weird. I don't think you can win and be consistently great with that kind of relationship. But Cameroon are proving that every time they go out there that they still get results. So we'll see how this goes. The reason why I'm a little bit hesitant is because Libya will also have that new coach bump. They brought in Aliou Cisse, formerly Senegal coach, of course, 9 years with the Senegalese Teranga Lions, AFCON winner in 2021. And he's been given a pretty big hefty contract at Libya, and it's an interesting project because again they have a shot at the FIFA World Cup, maybe second round. Who knows? Maybe they could qualify outright, but they have 7 points from 4 matches and they're second in the group. And Libya is undergoing a sort of renaissance and transformation. Um, at the local scene, they renovated two of their new stadiums, Benghazi and Tripoli, and they played these huge gala matches with AC Milan stars. The clubs are spending an inordinate amount of money. I think Libyan clubs in the last transfer this year, actually, over the two transfer windows, have spent the equivalent of $6 million in transfer fees and have sold practically nothing. I think just 200,000 or 300,000. So that's a net loss of, almost $6 million. Whereas I'll give you some other figures. Moroccan clubs, they bought $2 million of transfer fees, and I think they sold between 11 and 13. I think Egypt bought much higher. I think it was 11 and they sold 13 or 14. Algerian clubs bought, I think it was three and sold six. So you see, like most clubs, most leagues, when you look at the overall thing, they operate at a net profit, at least in terms of transfer fees, not necessarily wages. But in Libya, not only are they paying a crazy amount of wages, but the fees they're paying are crazy. And a lot of this money, you can speculate about where it's coming from, but a lot of people believe it's oil money coming from the eastern part of the country through, very powerful families. So it's an interesting one where LUCC, I think, will be given the means here, right? But how much patience will he be given? You know, well, if he drops, if he doesn't have great results, for example, in the first 3, 4 matches, is he going to be fired? Probably, I think so. So I think this is one of those where it can almost, maybe this is a bit dramatic. I was going to say almost make or break his reputation, because as successful as he was with Senegal, I think people are always going to say his squad was incredible. But if he can turn this around over here in Libya, and after such a catastrophic AFCON qualifying campaign, if he can take them to the World Cup, again, that's almost on the Sudan level, in terms of underdog stories. And it is really great, as usual, to see, different coaches from different parts of the continent go and work in different parts of the continent, especially and particularly, West African coaches or South African or East African coaches going to coach in North Africa. I think that breaks down a lot of barriers, and I think it's good for the game of and the continent in general. A few more groups. Group E, really Morocco, like I think Egypt, are easily going to pull away here. They play two matches at home in Wujda against Tanzania and Niger. The two teams behind them, and I think with wins they can pull away. And Morocco really have been. If we're going to do a power ranking, they're going to be the best team in Africa at the moment. They scored 12 goals in their last two matches in the international window. And when you look at the players they have in form, like Ibrahim Diaz at Real Madrid, Youssef and Nasiri at Fenerbahce, Elias Ben Sagir at Monaco, I mean, just they have an embarrassment of riches. They did bring in two young talents that I'm really excited to watch. Shamsuddin Talbi, apparently like Assane Diao, Belgium was on his tracks. Assane Diao was more Spain, but Belgium was on Shamsuddin Talbi's tracks, and he's decides to pick Morocco at a very, very young age of 19 years old, or maybe he's 18. And then Hamza Igeman, the striker at Rangers, who just scored a beautiful last minute goal to beat Celtic in the Old Firm derby. He's also been giving a chance now that Yusuf El Khabi's been ruled out with injury, one of those players that's been ruled out with injury. So, yeah, Morocco, like when I was listening to the press conference of Walid Regragui, it was interesting just listening to him speak and him saying, we're conscious that we're a big national team, that we have ambition, that we have to go to the World Cup, we have to do things at the World Cup. That's really cool to see, and really the main storyline later on in the year is going to be, will Morocco finally sort of break the curse and win an AFCON after 50 years uh, of not winning one since 1976. And so, they're building. They seem to be on the right track. But really, we're going to end up judging them, I think, later on in the year because this is a weak group, because they're playing so many matches at home. I think tactically, one of the main questions for them is who's going to be the right center back. I think it's the opposite of South Africa, who are desperately searching for a left-footed center back. Morocco, it's more the opposite because they have Naif Agard, who's left-footed. They had Roman Saiz before, who was left-footed. And Walid Regragui was looking for a right-footed center back for purposes of, build-up play, construction. Um, I think in the last international window they used Wydad Casablanca center half Jamal Harkas, but I think he was booed by the crowd in Wujda, which was very controversial. Apparently they've experimented even with Manchester United fullback Nusayr Mazraoui as a center half. Walid Regragui shut that down in the press conference. Said we're not gonna do that again. And they even brought in a new right back from Espanyol, Omar El Hilali, who could also debut as a center half, I think, or right footed, maybe in the back three, but again, Regragui said no, we're going to use him as a right back, as a full back in his natural position. So that's something to keep an eye on as the months go by. Moving on to Group F, this is another one that feels a little bit strange. I don't think any of these sides besides Cote d'Ivoire are really that good. Cote d'Ivoire feels a little bit stagnant though from the last AFCON. I mean, I remember watching that AFCON and saying the future should be bright. Sebastien Aller was coming off of, 2, 3. I know he was coming off of cancer recovery, but before that, playing at a very, very high level in Europe. Simon Adingra with his performance at the AFCON, I thought, oh, he's going to be a star. Even Omar Diakite on the opposite wing, I thought, he's very promising. Ibrahim Sangarin, Seko Fofana, and Frank Kessie as a midfield. But with Cote d'Ivoire, the problem is like a lot of these players didn't really develop as we expected them to. Omar Diakite, I think he scores like less than 5 goals per season with Stade Reims in France. Simon Adingra is not really starting for Brighton. Sebastien Aller is back at Utrecht. Okay, he's not like horrible or anything, but he's not playing, at the level that he was with Dortmund before. Ibrahim Sangare is always injured. He just had to coming back from a 4 to 5 month injury. And Seko Fofana is back in France after a period in Saudi Arabia, but even him, he's not really starting and he's not playing on the same level as he was prior to the AFCON. So, yeah, it's a weird one with Cote d'Ivoire. Um, the one players, players that are in form, like Amad Diallo from Manchester United, not in the squad. Karim Konate, who was, developing quite well, suffered knee ligament injury at the beginning of the season and is out for the season. So I feel like this is not the real Ivorian side, I think we're going to see that more towards the summer or the beginning of next year. Still, they should dispatch of their opponents easily, the Gambia and Burundi, and they should probably pull away just like Egypt and Morocco will, and quite clearly. be in shape to progress to the FIFA World Cup. Now, Group G is, I think, one of the closest groups because you have Algeria and Mozambique at the top of the group with 9 points each, and then Botswana, Guinea, and Uganda all have 6 points each. Only Somalia hasn't picked up a point and is straggling behind in last place of Group G. Algeria is in a weird place. They brought in coach Vladimir Petkovic, who I believe is the highest paid coach in African football on $135,000 per month. And he really brought a lot of calm and he eased tensions after Algeria's elimination. Because if you remember, Jamal Belmadi, the previous coach, he was always attacking the press. He was like, even on the touchline, he was like he was always irritated, very combative, fiery. That's just who he is. That's his personality. And at a certain point, the Algerian footballing landscape, it became like, are you pro Belmadi or are you anti Belmadi? It was kind of like Arsenal fans in the last few years of Wenger in, Wenger out, and this was like Belmadi in or Belmadi out, and so it was a very toxic place, Algerian football fanscape. But now things are much calmer. Vladimir Pekovic is somebody that's very diplomatic. He's gonna smile, shake hands with everybody. He's like Patrice Motsepe. He's always gonna say, "Oh, your country is so beautiful," and then so um, he really like took the air out of everything. But still, we don't really know what to make of it because he hasn't really come up against a really big test. Um, the lists of players that he's putting out are being criticized. People, I think, criticize Jamal Bamadi. One of the biggest criticisms was that he didn't change the group of players. The team that won him the 2019 AFCON was the team really that sort of lost him or got him eliminated from the next two AFCON group stages. And now when you look at, the players, the main players in the Algerian national team, Riyad Mahrez is back, Youssef Belaili is back, Baghdad Bounedjah is the striker, even though he's injured, but he's probably going to be the striker. Ismail Ben Nasser, Rami Ben Sabani in defense, Issa Mandi in defense, and it's like, this is it's the exact same thing that we were criticizing Bilmadi for, and he hasn't really you know taken any too many chances with calling up maybe young players. There's a really great winger in the domestic league named Adel Bulbina who's going to be playing in Europe next year. From the Paradou Academy, the best academy in Algeria. I think he scored 15 or 17 goals this year in the domestic league as a winger, leading scorer, and he was never called up to the national team. Yassine Titraoui, another really good young midfielder playing in Charleroi for Belgium, playing in Belgium for Charleroi, I should say, not given a chance as well. And he's just, yeah, calling up a lot of, stale names, old names, players like Said Ben Rahma, who's playing in the Division 2 of Saudi Arabian football. And he's never proven anything in the more than 10 years that he's been playing with the Algerian national team. So I think people are still waiting for like a reference match for him to play, to have Algeria playing really well against a very good side. And they have a tough test coming up, Mozambique. Um, Mozambique, I think, is one of the more underrated sides on the continent. And then they have to go to Botswana. They're starting the match. They're starting actually the break with Botswana away from home. And Botswana are a side like, speaking about Rwanda under Adel Amrouche, they're not really gonna be attacking. They're gonna try to score off a set piece and make the game as ugly as possible. So the match against Mozambique is the most crucial one. It's at home. You beat Mozambique away from home, and you need to pull away now. So 6 points would go a long way to assuaging any fears we have about Petkovic. But the minimum here is 4 points. I think you have to beat Botswana even away from home, and you have to at least, at the very very least, draw with Mozambique at home. But really, if he doesn't get 6 points here, the criticism is going to get a lot louder. Last two groups is Group H. Tunisia, by the way, congratulations. They're leading the group. They finally have a coach. Sami Trabelsi, who was the coach 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago now. Former international, former Tunisian player. Finally have a federation president. They were under normalization committee for a very, very long time. And now the question is, can they finally gather some momentum? Because offensively, this team has been one of the ugliest teams to watch on the African continent since the AFCON. In the last 10 matches since the AFCON, they've played 10 matches since the AFCON. They've scored 8 goals, which is not nearly good enough, of course. And it's not just like a problem of not having a striker, which they don't, but even like the offensive animation, the amount of goal scoring chances created is very, very low. Sami Trabelsi has been sort of criticized a bit for the list of players he called up. There's some of the best attacking players in the Tunisian league weren't called up. Players like Mejri or Ait Malik, or particularly the Esperance striker Ashraf Jabari or Youssef Snana from Jargis. These are all players that have been playing incredibly well in the Tunisian league, but they haven't been called up. And he called back a lot of older players, stale players, again, to use the word again, Naim Sliti, Ferjani Sassi, Saifuddin Jaziri, players that have been playing for the national team again for many, many, many years, and that people feel like we've seen their ceiling, and at this point in their careers, they're probably not good enough. One final point I'd make about the Tunisian Federation is that I think they have to go on the offensive for a lot of dual national players. They have a player like Ismail Gharbi at Braga, a young, talented player. He was a PSG Academy prodigy, and now he's finally getting a lot of matches in his legs, and I think he could add a lot of creativity to the Tunisian attack, as could Haysam Hassan, a player that has electric feet, very very good dribbler. And then in midfield, if you can bring in a Youssef Sharmiti, I know he's only played like maybe one or two matches for Everton at the moment, but he's supposed to be a huge prospect. If you can do what Morocco did with Shamsuddin Talbi, or what Senegal did with Assane Diao, and bring in a player like Youssef Sharmiti, I think that can go, again, a very, very long way for the Tunisian Federation. And then even put a lot of fans' minds at ease, because they see everybody else has managed to convince their diaspora to play for their national teams, but it's not necessarily the case for Tunisia. Um, Now, the reason why I think Tunisia are going to waltz through this group, it's not because I think Tunisia has been incredible and everybody else has been poop, but it's basically because next in the group you have Namibia, Liberia, Malawi, and their positions are a little bit inflated because Equatorial Guinea, if you remember, was sanctioned 6 points in this group, because of Emilio Nsue. Remember, he was deemed ineligible to have been playing for Equatorial Guinea over the last 10 years, and as a result, they were docked 6 points. Can they make up the deficit and make the playoffs? Maybe, but they don't. I don't think they can catch Tunisia here. And yeah, Namibia, Liberia, Malawi, I don't think are not on the level even of a very um, second-rate Tunisian side. So I think Tunisia is going to qualify quite comfortably here. And finally, Group I think could probably be the most interesting group out there. Comoros are leading the group with 9 points. Ghana have 9 points as well. Madagascar, Mali, and Central African Republic are then next with 7, 5, and 4 points respectively. Um, Look, Comoros have been the most coherent, consistent side in this group, and even in the AFCON qualifiers, they were really good. Um, Ghana are in a good place here because they're tied with Comoros with 9 points at the top of the group. But remember, they had a horrific AFCON qualifying campaign. Now, they didn't fire their coach, Otto Addo. They did make some tweaks. They brought in, I think he's 75 years old, German former manager, I think, of the Cameroonian national team, Winfried Schaffer, as a technical advisor to Otto Addo. Um, and Madagascar, Mali, and Central African Republic, they can make things difficult. They're not easy sides to play against. Compare them to, for example, the previous group, Namibia, Liberia, Malawi. I would much rather face those sides than Madagascar, Mali, and Central African Republic. And Comoros are doing this. They're not even playing in Moroni, which is, I remember, like, if you go play Comoros in Moroni, like that's a tough place to play. It's like the synthetic pitch, the atmosphere they can generate, the heat, the humidity. They're playing their matches in Morocco, but still the coherence again, like they attack together, they defend together, they have good quality in attack. Players like the striker Mizian Maulida and Rafiki Said have been great for the Coelocants. And then they've done a good job of recruiting young players from the diaspora. Again, this is what Tunisia need to do. Seydou Youssef in midfield, and then especially Warmed Omari from Lyon as a center half, Olympique de Lyon. So I have a lot of confidence in Comoros, but again, their ceiling is not as high, for example, as a Mali or a Ghana, but they're a better coach side and they are in a much healthier place at the moment. So they're going to be tough to beat. They're not going to beat themselves. They play against Mali in Morocco and then Chad in Morocco. Mali are on the ropes. 5 points in 4 matches. It's not the end of the world, but this is why they brought in their coach Tom Saintfiet. Remember, Eric Shell with Nigeria, that he was brought in with one objective: get us to the World Cup. Same thing with Tom Saintfiet in Mali. Um, and this is going to be his biggest test since taking over. One thing that he's been in charge for 6 matches, and I have to take my hat off to him because in 6 matches, they've only conceded one goal. 4 wins and 2 draws, 0 losses, and they only conceded one goal, and that was in his first match against Mozambique. Um, and so I think this is a good sign. When you see a coach come in and immediately realize that the first thing he has to do is shore up the defense. I think this is a coach. I immediately think this is a coach that knows international football and knows how to shore up problems. And Tom Saintfiet, I said I read an interview of his recently. I thought it was very interesting. He said, "Look, we're not going to do tiki taka. We're not going to do gegen pressing." He's like, "That's not realistic with international teams." He said, "You have players 3 days before a match, maximum 3 days before a match. So we really have to focus on simple, clear tactics, and mostly about working on the spirit of the group." And this is just an experienced coach talking about, how to get the most out of a group. It's pragmatism, and I think that's what Mali needs in a sense, because if they've been criticized, it's been maybe for being naive and maybe for mental weakness. And I think Tom Saintfiet's done a lot of good, to be fair to him. So but like we said about Cote d'Ivoire, I think they have a lot of players that we thought would have incredible potential at the age of 18, 19, 20, 21, but haven't really lived up to it. So Sekou Koita, for example, with, the Red Bull teams, I mean, we thought he would be in a much better place than he is now. I know he was suspended for drug use. I think he had a bad knee injury, but still. El Bilal Toure, the striker, another one. Nene Dorgelis has been having a good season for Red Bull as well, but even him, I thought he would be in a better place than he is at the moment. And then even in midfield, Mohamed Kamara and Aliou Dieng, formerly of Monaco and Al Ahly respectively, now both playing in Saudi Arabia, they've seemed to stagnate as well. So yeah, um, I think if you look at the Somali side 5, 6 years ago, you would have been much more optimistic in their ceiling. But nowadays, maybe just they have the experience, and under Tom Saintfiet, I think um, they need to at least get 4 points out of the six. If they can do that, I think that would make him really an early Coach of the Year candidate in Africa. Um, yeah, and then Ghana have two easy matches against Chad and Madagascar. Not easy, but for this group, not the worst. And they really have to prove that they're sort of back. They have to send a message, not just to themselves, but also to the supporters and even to their government and everything. They have to prove to people that what happened at the AFCON was a big mistake and that they've turned the page. If not, I think Otto Addo can go. If he doesn't get at least 3 points out of six here, I think there's a very good chance that he might be gone here. They need to not only win points, but they need to do it with style, in my opinion, and to send a signal to get everybody back on board. Because if not, this thing can get very ugly very quickly. I mean, we remember the press conference that Addo had last time around in November, where journalists were saying, like, what made you qualified to coach the Ghanaian national team? You don't really know football. So they can be very, very contentious. Anyways, we've been running for a very long time, more than 40 minutes. So we're going to wrap it up here with just categorizing teams into three categories here. Teams expected to wrap up qualifying at the end of this transfer window, at the end of this international window, in my opinion: Morocco, Egypt, Cameroon, Cote d'Ivoire, and Tunisia. Teams that I think will put themselves in a great position after this international window: Senegal, Nigeria. I, I feel iffy about this one, but I think Nigeria could. Algeria, definitely. Burkina Faso, South Africa, DR Congo, Gabon, and Mali. And that's based on their quality of the sides and also the opposition they're playing. And then teams that I think could drop points here, and this could be a tricky international window for. Many of them are actually Portuguese speaking: Angola, Guinea Bissau, Cape Verde as well, Sudan, unfortunately, Benin, Uganda, and Madagascar. So, uh, anyways, we're going to be checking in almost on a daily basis, reacting to the day's matches. It was good to come back and just talk to you all. Going to be much, much, much more active. So, yeah, good to be back with the African Five Side podcast. If you've enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up. Please comment below on which matches you're looking forward to. I'm going to make sure I respond to everybody, and I'll speak to you all very, very soon. Peace.